My wife turned pale when I unexpectedly arrived at the party where she was with her lover kissing, and in that instant, something inside me broke in a way I never knew could break. My body froze, my eyes burned, but it was the silence, her damn silence when she saw me, that killed me inside. She simply froze, her lips still parted, wet from another man's kiss, her eyes wide as if the crime wasn't what she did, but the fact that I saw it. I was there, standing at the entrance to that bright room, the loud sound drowning out the screams that were rising in my chest, and even so, I could clearly hear the sound of my heart shattering into 1,000 pieces. That was a shock to me, a punch in the stomach that knocked the air out of me and left me blind for a few seconds. When she let go of his hands, trying to hide the gesture, trying to take it back, it was already too late. I saw everything. The way she touched him, as if she had done it 1,000 times. The look of guilt, the fear of being caught, the despair of realizing that there was no more way to pretend. And her lover, next to her, as cowardly as she was, just turned his face away, wiped his lips and took 2 steps back, as if he had absolutely nothing to do with it. As if I were nobody. As if I didn't exist. And I wanted to scream, I wanted to attack him, I wanted to ask why fair to me, why after everything I've done, why after all the sleepless nights, the sacrifices, the future plans, the late-night conversations about children, trips, old age together, she decided to throw it all away because of a dirty kiss at some party. But I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't make a fuss. I just took my cell phone out of my pocket and called a friend, a lawyer, and asked for help. He said, "I'm having the worst night of my life, and I need you to help me make the most shocking divorce this country has ever seen." And I hung up. What happened after that, no one could predict. That woman, the same one who said she loved me, who slept hugging me every night, who sent me messages saying, "Don't be long, I miss you," became a stranger before my eyes. As I approached, she mouthed my name, trying to construct a quick lie, but her mouth was trembling so much that she seemed unable to form a sentence. And I just asked, "Is this how it ends? After everything, this is how you chose to end us?" She tried to justify herself, tried to touch my hand, but I moved away. There, in the middle of all those people, in the middle of the music, the fake smiles, the glasses of sparkling wine, my life became a joke. I was the man betrayed in front of dozens of witnesses, the idiot who couldn't see. And her lover? He simply turned and ran away. He didn't even have the courage to face what he caused. He disappeared into the crowd, like a frightened mouse. And she, realizing that she was alone in that public exhibition, tried to follow me, tried to beg for forgiveness, but my mind was already made up. There was no fight, there was no physical scandal. Just cold silence, humiliation running down her face as I turned away. She called me several times. I kept walking. And I still remember the last words she said that night, "Please don't destroy everything we live, you still love me." And the only thing I could say was, "You killed everything when you chose another pair of lips." I left that place and, inside the car, still not knowing whether I was shaking with anger or pain, I tried to understand where I had gone wrong. And the question that tore at me inside was, why didn't she choose me? In the days that followed, the story spread. Friends, acquaintances, even her coworkers found out. The lover was someone from our circle. The type of person who smiled at me, greeted me, asked me about investments, about travel, about life. And now, I had seen the truth wide open before my eyes, everything was a lie. All. But what no one expected was what would happen next. She tried to justify herself in every way. I said it was a mistake, an impulse, that I was confused, that I didn't want to get lost. You tried to win me back. I sent messages every day. I was going to the door of my house. I called my friends, my family. He wrote letters. He made scandals in front of the building. He cried, shouted that he still loved me. But it was already too late. Respect had been buried with that kiss. Trust had been destroyed the second our hands let go in that room. And then came the unexpected. The lover abandoned her. Yes. Exactly. The same man for whom she had risked an entire marriage, a home, a story, simply disappeared. And he didn't leave because he felt guilty. No. He ran away because he was afraid. Fear of scandal, fear of his name being involved in something so dirty, fear of losing his own reputation. Because, unlike her, he wasn't willing to pay the price. And she was alone. With the weight of regret, with the judgmental looks, with friends slowly disappearing, and with the humiliation that she herself had excavated. She began to be seen as the woman who betrayed a man who had always loved her. And the more she tried to justify herself, the deeper she sank. Because people remembered, commented, judged. And every time she walked past someone who had been at that party, the silence became deafening. She lost everything. She lost her credibility, her respect, her peace. She slept badly. She cried in secret. And worst of all, she kept waiting for me to come back. She kept thinking there was still time. But there wasn't. I moved on. I suffered, of course. I cried whole nights alone, wondering how someone who promised to be by my side until the end of his life chose to lose himself for momentary pleasure. But one day, I realized that the problem was never with me. And, ironically, it was precisely in the midst of this chaos, when I no longer believed in anything, that I found a new love. A different, calm, sincere love. That arrived without rushing, without empty promises, and gave me back my ability to trust. Meanwhile, she continued trying to fix what could no longer be saved. Her pain became the echo of the decisions she made. And every day, she was forced to face the mirror and see that no one else wanted her. Not the lover, not society, not me. Because there are things that, once broken, there is no going back. But the most surprising of all was yet to come. Something no one could have predicted. Something that changed everything. And that's why this story needs to be told to the end. Because what happened after that kiss, that damn kiss at the party, was much more than a divorce. It was a fall. A punishment. A lesson for everyone who believes they can betray those who love them without paying the price. And the price, oh, the price was much higher than she imagined. Now tell me, do you think she deserved forgiveness? Or did destiny still have something else in store for her? Welcome to the channel. Here, we do not support any type of betrayal, on the contrary, our stories show with intensity how it destroys lives, hearts and futures. All narratives are fictitious, but the feelings they awaken are real, because they reflect the consequences that many choose to ignore. Get ready, because what are you about to hear? It's shocking, profound and unforgettable. Let the story begin. In everyone's eyes, Daniel and Laura were the perfect couple. He was a man with calm speech, steady eyes and a patience that bordered on unbreakable. She, an engaging, elegant woman, with the kind of smile that conquered any environment. They had been together for 12 years, married for 8, and no one could say that there was anything missing between them. They had a house built with dedication, in a neighborhood where birdsong still competed with the distant noise of the city. The garden was Laura's pride, the flowers were always lined up, alive, as a reflection of the harmony she insisted on maintaining within the house. And Daniel, meticulous with his schedule, took care of the invisible details, house maintenance, taxes paid on time, the small gestures of love that he considered essential to keep the relationship warm. For years, they shared the routine with admirable fluidity. Daniel would wake up before the sun to run, come back, prepare coffee, and make a point of leaving a note on the table, always with something sweet, an inspiring phrase, or just, "I love you, good morning." Laura, who worked at an events agency, started the day slower, but always paid attention to the smallest details, the right clothes, the right perfume, impeccable posture. She said it wasn't vanity, it was presence. Their marriage was built on that kind of care. It wasn't an explosive love, but a constant one. Without major public statements, but with complicity in silence. Friends admired them. Families considered them a reference. They had a chemistry that went beyond kisses and hugs. It was something in the way they looked at each other in conversations, how they respected each other in conflicts. And yes, there were conflicts. They never stopped being real. They discussed work, the time they spent together, the future. But they always managed to get back to balance. At least, that's what it seemed like. The home they built was full of life, but not children. By mutual choice, they had decided to wait. Or, who knows, maybe never have them. Laura said that their love was enough, and Daniel respected it. But there were nights when he would look up at the ceiling, lying next to her, and wonder what it would be like to hear children's laughter throughout the house. Still, he didn't press. Never pressured. They traveled frequently. They knew Tuscany, New York, Cartagena well. Each trip was an attempt to save more good moments, filling the memory album with candid photos. On one of his trips to the coast, Daniel rented a house facing the sea and spent hours preparing a surprise dinner to celebrate Laura's birthday. She cried when she saw the candles, the table set, the favorite song in the background. He said that was the happiest moment of his life. And he believed. Every word, every tear, every gesture. At work, Daniel was respected for his competence. Civil engineer, dedicated, proud of the works he supervised. He spent days away, sometimes weeks, in distant flower beds, but he always came back with flowers and stories. He never forgot a birthday, he never failed to respond to a message. It was constant. Stable. Laura, in turn, was passionate about what she did. He had talent with people, he led teams with firmness and lightness. He knew how to resolve crises with elegance, and his name was already well known in social events. Dinners, cocktails, launches, she was always involved in something glamorous, and Daniel was never jealous of that. He trusted her like someone trusts their own breathing. Their relationship had the weight of years, but also the lightness of small discoveries. They had rituals, like pizza on Friday, breakfast in bed on Sundays, walks in the park at dusk. And they had plans. They talked about buying a house in the country, about opening a business together, about growing old next to each other, watching life go by from the balcony. Their home was a reflection of what they had built. Furniture chosen together, every detail with a story. The brick wall in the living room was a request from Laura, the piano in the corner was a gift from Daniel, even though he knew she only played it for fun. In the kitchen, travel magnets and handwritten recipes, some inherited from his grandmother. Everything breathed memory and intimacy. Their life was engraved in every corner. And, even with all this apparent harmony, there were silences that lasted longer than usual. Small absences justified by tiredness. Laura started going out more, arriving late more often. He said it was the events, the unpostponable commitments. And Daniel, always understanding, offered support. Never questioned. I even thought it was good that she was growing professionally. After all, he knew how hard she fought to gain respect in her environment. Between one dinner and another, empty spaces began to appear. Small things, the absence of spontaneous laughter, the eyes that didn't meet as often, the touches that seemed more automatic than intimate. Daniel, deep down, understood. But he preferred to believe it was just a phase. Time does that to couples, he told himself. And Laura, when asked if everything was okay, always responded with a long kiss and a, of course yes, love. On special dates, they still exchanged gifts. On wedding anniversaries, they relived old photos, remembering how they met one spring afternoon in a cafe near the center. And that memory still connected them. It was as if, every time they talked about that day, something inside them reconnected. The problem is that, over time, conversations became shorter, calls became less frequent, hugs became more distant. But none of these changes were sudden. They were subtle, slow, disguised by custom and convenience. People around kept praising the couple. They said they were inspiration. Who wished to have a love like theirs? And Daniel smiled, always smiled, even when he felt like something was missing. Because there was still love. He was sure of it. I just didn't know if it was the same love as before, or if it was just a reflection of it. Laura, on the other hand, was increasingly immersed in commitments. Meetings, events, networking dinners. She was always busy, always with something important to resolve. And Daniel, even though he felt the absence, refused to see bad intentions where there had always been trust. Even on social media, they continued to show the world the image of a united couple. Posts on commemorative dates, smiles at dinners, passionate captions. But behind that lens, the smiles no longer had the same shine. It was as if they lived inside a beautiful portrait, but framed by habit, no longer by passion. Weekends still brought moments of closeness. Movies at night, coffee together, occasional laughter. But they were no longer natural. They were built. Forced, perhaps. And yet, Daniel believed. Because whoever loves, believes. And Laura, even though she was distant at times, still had gestures of affection, still looked at him as if she saw him. And sometimes, that was all it took for him to move on. What Daniel didn't know was that, behind those gestures, there was a conflict that Laura carried alone. An internal tension, a battle between what she was and what she wanted to be. Between what he had and what, perhaps, he thought he deserved to live for. And this silent clash fueled decisions that had not yet been fully manifested, but that would soon take shape. Everything seemed stable. Life was running within the normality that so many wanted. The photos were in place. The garden bloomed. The bills were paid. The couple that everyone admired still walked hand in hand through the streets. But time, that silent judge, was already in a hurry to turn the next page. And nothing, absolutely nothing, would prepare Daniel for what was to come. Because when you live inside a bubble of trust, the pain of betrayal doesn't come like a scream. It comes like a whisper, devastating, unexpected, cruel. On the third Tuesday of the month, Daniel arrived home earlier than usual. The project he was working on had been postponed and, without warning, he decided to surprise him. In the trunk, a wine that Laura always said she loved, the same one they drank on their first trip to Europe. He also carried a bag of fresh ingredients to prepare a special dinner. Simple things, but thought out with the care of someone who still believed that details kept the flame of a relationship alive. The sky was tinged with an amber hue when he parked. He opened the gate gently, peering through the window before entering, expecting to see Laura in the room, perhaps with a book or organizing some new event idea. But the house was empty. Silent. The cell phone showed a message from hours ago: "I'm working late today, love. Big event to close, wish me luck." He smiled, not suspecting anything, and decided to prepare everything himself. Dinner is ready, the table is set, the music is low, filling the atmosphere with nostalgia. Daniel looked at his watch. It was after 9. He sent a message asking if she would come soon. No response. Half an hour later, he tried to call. The call went to voicemail. He thought about work worries, stress, traffic. He thought about everything except the truth. And when the clock struck almost midnight, he collected the still untouched dishes, put away the wine and turned off the music. The silence was now uncomfortable. The longing for what no longer happened knocked on the door with force. And he went to sleep with a pain in his chest that he couldn't explain. The following days continued with a slight tension hanging in the air. Laura seemed more scattered, her eyes were sometimes distant, sometimes too attentive. Daniel tried to ignore the change. I preferred to believe it was work, that it was tiredness. But something worried him, like a background sound that he couldn't silence. He began to notice small differences. The perfume she wore seemed different, more intense, more striking. The clothes changed, they became bolder, as if she was dressing to be noticed by someone other than him. And there were also the messages that she received and responded to quickly, putting away her cell phone like someone hiding a secret. But even in the face of this, Daniel remained silent. Confidence still spoke louder. Or maybe it was fear of hearing what I didn't want to hear. Until one night, when going through the clothes in the closet, she noticed a scarf that wasn't hers. The scent permeated was masculine, different, foreign to the house. He stood still for a few seconds, his heart racing, his hands shaking. When he questioned Laura, she laughed and said it must have been an event gift, that someone must have dropped it. His voice sounded natural, convincing, like someone with nothing to hide. But there was an almost imperceptible tremor in her eyes, a delay of thousands between the question and the answer that Daniel, knowing her every gesture, was unable to ignore. The planted distrust became a constant noise in his mind. The following nights were filled with insomnia. Dinner was no longer the same. The kisses, still present, seemed more formal than sensual. He wondered, between cold sips of coffee and broken naps, if there was still love there or if just the habit remained. At work, your productivity plummeted. There was a lack of focus. There was a lack of peace. In the midst of the turmoil, he made a silent decision: he would not confront. I would observe. I would understand it myself before making any move. And that's exactly what he did. He started to notice her schedule. On days when he said he had events and arrived with wet hair, like someone who had taken a shower outside. In absences justified with vague excuses. Little by little, he built an invisible map of Laura's actions, an unspoken script that only he read. And the more I read, the more the story seemed to stray from the truth it told. Until one day, out of instinct, he decided to follow her. He left minutes after she left the garage, kept his distance, his hands sweating on the steering wheel, his heart thundering inside his chest. She didn't go to the office. He didn't go to any event hotel. He didn't meet any clients. He parked on a remote street, in a reserved area, and entered a modern building with a mirrored glass facade. Daniel stayed there, in the car, for almost an hour, fighting the urge to invade, to confront, to ask. But he didn't. He returned home, his mind in meltdown. Over the next few days, his behavior changed. He became colder, more direct, more restrained. And Laura noticed. He started asking if something was bothering him, if everything was okay at work. He said yes, it was just stress. And she, relieved, smiled and changed the subject. Daniel started avoiding eye contact during conversations. Not because he didn't want to see her, but because he couldn't stand the reflection of the lie in her eyes any longer. And still, even though he was hurt, he continued trying to understand. He searched within himself for some flaw, some moment when he was no longer enough. I searched for memories, looking for lines, gestures, possible absences. I couldn't find anything to justify it. And that hurt even more. Until a message, forgotten on the bathroom mirror, sealed the end of the doubt. Laura had left in a hurry and left her cell phone unlocked. The notification appeared like a gunshot. Today was perfect. I can't wait to see you again. Daniel, with his eyes fixed on that sentence, felt the ground slipping away from under his feet. Read the entire conversation. The sweet words. The promises. The nicknames. He read and reread until he no longer had the strength to hold the cell phone. And it was there, in that bathroom, where he saw Laura putting on makeup smiling at him so many times, that love went down the drain along with the illusion. But he didn't confront. Not yet. He didn't scream, he didn't cry, he didn't argue. He saved everything. Made copies. Sent to himself. And it went back to being the same as before. He used to smile. He touched her gently. He said he loved her. While inside, the heart was preparing for a battlefield. The only thing she did differently was call a longtime friend, a trusted lawyer, and arrange a meeting. I wanted to know the paths. You wanted to protect yourself. And more than anything, I wanted to have everything ready for the right moment. And that moment came on an unexpected night, when Daniel was invited to a party for an important client. I knew Laura would also go, her agency was one of the organizers. And he went. With elegance. With serenity. With a calm face, but attentive eyes. He watched everything. Greeted people. Smiled. Drank. And then, in the middle of the track, he saw it. Like a punch in the stomach, he saw the kiss. It wasn't a quick, distracted kiss, or one of misinterpreted friendship. It was a whole kiss. Far away. Deep. And on Laura's face, a glow he hadn't seen in a long time. He stood there for a few seconds. No one seemed to notice him. Until she saw him. His eyes widened, his body froze. He didn't say a word. He just walked toward the exit, his dignity intact, although his chest was in ruins. As he left, he took his cell phone out of his pocket and dialed a familiar number. "I need you. Now. Let's get this divorce started." But I want it to be unforgettable. The silence after the call was filled with a new feeling. A cruel kind of clarity. The pain was still there, pulsing, alive, but there was also something else, determination. The need for justice. And while Laura remained inside the party, trying to regain control, Daniel was already plotting his next step. Because what she didn't know was that that kiss wouldn't just be the end of a marriage. It would be the beginning of a fall. And she was about to discover that the price of betrayal would be much higher than she imagined. The morning after the party, Laura arrived home without saying a word. The heel in hand, the face clean of makeup, the hair tied up in a hurry. He entered slowly, as if afraid of the echo of his own steps. The house was silent. Daniel hadn't slept. He was sitting on the sofa, with his eyes fixed on the floor, his hands clasped as if holding himself up. When she entered, he didn't look at her. Time seemed to lengthen between the two. Laura tried to speak, but found no voice. He walked towards him with short, almost regretful steps, but before he could touch his shoulder, Daniel stood up. Loud, steady, with a calm that was almost more violent than a scream. She backed away. He took a deep breath, finally meeting her eyes, and said, in a dry tone, but full of contained pain, "You could have said. I could have chosen the truth. But he chose the cruelest path. And now, there is no going back." Laura tried to argue, the words came out in disarray, full of improvised excuses, empty promises, justifications built on despair. She said she was confused, that she missed something, that she didn't want to hurt him. Daniel listened to her, but each word seemed to fall into a deep well of silence. And then, when she finally stopped, he opened the envelope on the table and took out some sheets. It was the separation contract. Laura staggered when she saw that. I was still hoping for a second chance, an impossible forgiveness. But it wasn't the end that scared her. That was what would come next. Days later, the documents were filed, the lawyers were called, the circle of friends was divided between shock and silence. But the most unexpected was yet to happen. At the preliminary hearing, while the lawyers discussed the terms of the division, Daniel, with an almost cruel serenity, asked to speak. The judge authorized it. Everyone expected a speech about goods, about sorrows, about betrayal. But he just said, "There is something that needs to be included in this process. A new fact." And he turned to Laura. His voice was cold, but without hate. Just lethal. "The man you cheated on me with, sought me out." The impact was immediate. Laura turned pale, her hands shaking under the table. She tried to understand what he was saying, but the revelation didn't stop there. Daniel continued, slowly, as if each sentence were a scalpel cutting through certainties. "He sent me a message, asking to talk. He said he needed to clarify something that had happened. I confess I didn't understand why. But I went. We met in a cafe 2 days after that night. He looked nervous, haggard. And you told me there was something you didn't have the courage to tell me. Laura tried to interrupt him, but her lawyer discreetly held her back. Daniel then approached the table slightly, staring into her eyes with the strength of someone who no longer has anything to lose. He said that you told him that you were married, yes, but that the marriage was a sham. That there was nothing between us anymore. That you needed to keep up appearances because of a financial agreement. That your emotional freedom was tied to a contract. And that this contract was with me. Laura tried to defend herself, mumbling something, but Daniel silenced her with a restrained gesture. He said that, at first, he believed in you. Who was moved by the story of a woman trapped by a cold and controlling husband. But, over time, he realized that he was not the only one being manipulated. You made him believe that I was forcing you to stay in the marriage, that I was threatening to take everything from you, that I was only with you out of convenience. And all this, to keep two parallel worlds functioning under the same lie. But what he didn't expect, was that, when he investigated you, when he tried to confirm the stories, he ended up discovering the opposite. And that's when everything turned around. Laura jumped up, her face flushed, her voice choked, asking him to stop. But Daniel didn't stop. He now spoke with a harsh clarity, the confidence of someone holding the final pieces of a puzzle in their hands. He discovered that you had convinced him that I was a rich, influential man, and that I could be dangerous if he was crossed. You painted a picture of me that doesn't even come close to the truth. I told him that I needed to maintain the marriage for a few more months, until we completed the sale of a property, and after that you would have access to an amount that I promised to share. Which, of course, never existed. Here comes the cruelest thing, Laura. The dirtiest. Daniel stopped for a second. Laura was now shaking all over, her eyes wide, as if she finally knew what was coming. And it came. The man you cheated on me with, he was married. He had children. And when the wife found out, she didn't just confront him, she kicked him out of the house, destroyed his image, and did something no one expected, she contacted me. She was the one who showed me the messages. She was the one who sent me the prints of the conversations where you said you loved him, but that you needed to keep up appearances. Where he said he used me. That it was all part of a plan to ensure a safe future for both of you. And then, you would disappear with me with the money from the sale of the house. But you didn't think he would talk too much. That he would falter. That he would regret it. Laura was now crying. It fell apart. He tried to hold on to his own words as if they were broken weapons. But there was nothing left to justify. Daniel looked at her with compassion, but also with contempt. Not for the kiss. Not by physical betrayal. But for everything she planned behind it. By manipulation. By conscious lying. For the cowardice of pretending to love someone she only exploited. And then, Daniel finished. It's not about cheating anymore, Laura. It's about who you choose to become. And how he destroyed everything we built not with a mistake, but with a cold decision. And meanwhile, the lover you thought would stay, abandoned you. His wife sued him. He lost everything. And you? You'll get whatever's left after all this. But of my love, there was nothing left. The silence that took over the room was absolute. The judge, the lawyer, even those present in the waiting room felt the density of the moment. Laura, devastated, could no longer hold her gaze. For the first time, she understood that losing Daniel wasn't just about losing a husband. It was losing the only link with a version of yourself that might have value. And while she tried to pick up the pieces of her own reflection, Daniel withdrew. No rush. No hate. Only with the conviction that everything had been exposed. But outside that room, outside the pain that now fell upon Laura like a sentence, there was something that Daniel still didn't know. One last detail. A play that would change the course of history. Something that was about to come to light. And that would reveal that the hole was even deeper. Much more. The courtroom had been emptied, but the fragments of the words still hung in the air like invisible shards cutting through everything around them. Laura remained sitting for long minutes, unable to even get up. The air felt thick, suffocating, and the sound of the door closing behind Daniel echoed like a definitive closure, an end of no return. The lawyer tried to organize the papers, but her look was that of someone who already knew there was nothing left to defend. What had been revealed there went beyond legal barriers, and Laura knew it. She knew that she was no longer seen as a woman who made mistakes, but as someone who engineered, manipulated and destroyed. The lover had disappeared. Gone as if it had never existed, leaving her alone with the weight of her own choices. Betrayal was no longer a hidden act, now it was a minefield that exploded with every step towards the past. And at that moment, what consumed her was not regret. It was the belated realization that there was no going back. That some words spoken, some plans made in secret, are sentences that are written in permanent ink. Laura drove home in silence, driving the car like a drifting ghost. The sun was already beginning to set when he crossed the entrance to his old home. The house looked different, as if it had aged in the last few hours. The pictures on the walls no longer told the same story. The sofa cushions felt cooler. And the sound of silence became unbearable. She paced around the room as if searching for something that reminded her of who she was before all of this. He stopped in front of the hallway mirror and stared at his own reflection with an expression he had never seen on his own face. It wasn't guilt what he saw. It was ruin. A devastation that began in the eyes and extended to the soul. He tried to cry, but there were no tears. What I felt was not passing pain. It was a mourning without a body. The absence of something she herself killed with her own hands. In the days that followed, Laura isolated herself. The phone calls stopped. The messages stopped. The friends disappeared one by one, some out of shame, others out of contempt disguised as distance. The work environment has become hostile territory. The looks, previously filled with admiration, now carried judgment. And the events that once gave him prestige now only brought him embarrassment. The story spread, not with scandals, but with the subtle force of accurate rumors. Everyone knew. Everyone was commenting. And every time she entered a new space, she could feel the gazes cutting into her skin. But what really hurt her was Daniel's absence. The void he left was not just physical. It was symbolic. He was gone and he took with him the only version of love she had ever truly known. Daniel, in turn, had changed cities. A new phase began. A new address. A different routine. He had handed over his old house to the real estate agency. He sold what he didn't want to carry, donated what it didn't make sense to take. He only carried what had real value, some clothes, personal objects, and the memories he still couldn't bury. The new house was smaller, more practical, with less adornment. The walls were still bare, but for the first time in a long time, he felt room to breathe. Started running in the morning again. He exchanged messages with his sister. I visited the corner bookstore on Sundays. And slowly, the silence within him gave way to a new peace, one that came not from the absence of pain, but from the presence of clarity. I still thought about Laura, but no longer with anger. He thought with detachment, as if remembering someone who existed in another life. The broken trust had turned into a kind of shield. He didn't close himself off from the world, but now he saw better who he let in. It was during this period that he met Clara. Nothing planned. A fluke. One morning at the coffee shop where he started going after the race. She was sitting with a laptop, arguing with the server about the temperature of the coffee. He had an impatient but not aggressive manner. An acidic humor that brought a restrained smile from him. She noticed. He commented something. She responded sarcastically. And there, in that first light clash, something formed. Clara was different. I didn't try to please. He had firm opinions, but he knew how to listen. He had also gone through a divorce years before. I understood about losses. But more than that, he knew how to talk without rushing. In the first conversations, Daniel was reserved. He spoke little about the past. She didn't insist. And when he finally decided to tell, Clara just looked at him with empathy. He didn't say he understood, he didn't offer advice. I just said, "I'm glad you came out of this in one piece. That's enough for now." The time with Clara was not intense. It was mature. A meeting of two pieces that, ironically enough, fit together lightly. He wasn't looking for a new love, but he found himself allowing her to occupy previously inaccessible spaces. And, little by little, Laura became a name that appeared less and less in his thoughts. Meanwhile, on the other side of a city where she was no longer welcome, Laura faced a deeper crisis. Not just because of the loss of Daniel, but because of something that started to disturb her more and more. She discovered that her lover, when leaving the relationship, didn't just abandon her. He exposed. He told his wife everything he knew. Sent documents, messages, emails. In fact, part of the records that she believed were erased. And his wife, in addition to destroying her husband's reputation, filed a lawsuit against Laura for slander and defamation. There was evidence that Laura lied about Daniel in several messages, alleging abuse that never happened. He had manipulated conversations. Changed contexts. All with the aim of controlling the lover. Now, in addition to facing emotional emptiness, she would have to answer in court for everything. The scandal, previously restricted to social circles, became public. Some local outlets began to explore the case. Daniel was contacted, but declined to comment. He just said he was focused on rebuilding his life and didn't want to fuel anyone's exposure. Clara, upon finding out, just held his hand and told him that he shouldn't carry any of that. Laura now walked the streets like a shadow of her former self. Events evaporated. The contracts are gone. She tried to start over in another office, but no one wanted to associate her name with anything. It had become toxic. His phone no longer rang. The few friends that remained moved away for good. One night, unable to sleep, Laura wrote a letter to Daniel. It was long, sincere, without appeals, without requests for return. He talked about guilt. From the error. From the vanity that consumed her. The need to be desired, seen, admired. He said he didn't know how to deal with the stability of true love. Who confused constancy with boredom. And who exchanged a solid love for a momentary and fragile desire. She said if he never forgave her, she would understand. But she needed to say, in some way, that, deep down, she always loved him. Even when you did everything wrong. She never sent the letter. He preferred to keep it. As a reminder. Like a sentence. Because in the end, what hurt most was not the judgment of others. It was knowing that Daniel really knew her. Who saw its essence. And even so, she disappointed him. Meanwhile, Daniel lived lighter days. He still had scars. There were still too many silent nights. But now, there was hope. Clara laughed easily. And Daniel, when he saw her, felt that maybe, just maybe, love wasn't over for him. It had only changed shape. And Laura, in that house too big for just one person, wrote, erased, rewrote. As if, by trying to order the words, she could at least rescue some part of herself. But what you lost, you might never get back. Because there are mistakes that can't be corrected. There are loves that, once broken, don't stick. And there are silences that say it all. Even when no one else is listening. The weeks following the silent implosion of Daniel and Laura's marriage scattered like loose leaves on a warm late-season wind, each day a sharper reminder that certain ruins cannot be rebuilt with apologies or good intentions. There were no more fights, unanswered messages or sleepless nights due to suspicions. Now there was just a vacuum. The kind of emptiness that doesn't make a sound, but consumes from within like a hungry termite destroying what seemed solid. Laura, trapped in a house that no longer carried purpose, lived among silent corridors and memories that once seemed like achievements and now seemed like relics of a farce. The letter he never sent to Daniel remained in his drawer, folded carefully, as if he feared that touching the paper might awaken ghosts he had barely begun to bury. Each day he reread the words he wrote, pondering whether there was enough honesty there to be forgiven, or whether they were just the remnants of a remorse that came too late. She tried to move forward in a practical way, resolving legal issues, selling furniture, exchanging small objects in the house to break emotional triggers. But there was no way to cover his tracks. The cup with the broken handle that he insisted on using, the music she listened to in the shower and that only made sense when he knocked on the door pretending he wanted to come in, the recipes he tried to learn just to impress her, even though he always got the salt measure wrong. All of this remained there, not as a fond memory, but as a mirror of what she wasted. And the dilemma that began to gnaw at his mind was no longer about winning back, but about allowing himself to be someone better, and whether that still mattered when there was no one else willing to see that change. She began to question the value of redemption when you have no one to show it to. She began to question whether there is merit in trying to be good when the only witness to this attempt is emptiness itself. On the other side of this emotional journey, Daniel also navigated dense seas. Clara had become a constant presence, but he still carried unspoken layers. There were days when he smiled lightly, and others when silence took over him for hours. Clara, sensitive to fluctuations, respected her times. It didn't require explanations, but it offered space. Still, a doubt hovered inside Daniel with a different weight than the one he felt during the chaos of betrayal. Was it fair to involve someone in a new beginning who still carried open scars? He found himself observing Clara in the most banal details, the way she tied her hair, the way she squinted her eyes when she laughed, and wondered if he could love her fully or if he was just sheltering from a storm that had already passed, but left everything damp inside. The fear of repeating mistakes or not being able to respond created a silent tension that not even he could name. There were no lies there, but there was still a fear that, by opening up too much, he might let out fragments of a past he preferred to keep secret. It was on a gray afternoon, with a fine, steady drizzle, that Daniel received an unexpected call. It was from a mutual friend, someone who had disappeared from their lives since their separation, but who still maintained some connection with Laura. The voice on the other end of the line was hesitant, as if weighing each word before speaking. She said that Laura had resigned from the agency, that she was about to move, but that before that, she was looking for closure. Not to win her back. Not to appeal. Just to close her eyes. Daniel listened to everything in silence, thanked her, but did not respond immediately. He spent the rest of the day distracted, looking out the window, as if waiting for the weather to tell him what to do. And when Clara arrived for dinner, he realized that something was different. Daniel, for the first time, told her everything. Not in detail, but enough for Clara to understand that that moment was not about Laura, but about him. He said he needed to see his ex-wife one last time, not because he missed her, but because he needed to free himself completely. Clara, with rare maturity, nodded. He didn't show jealousy. He didn't ask for details. I just said, then go and come back clean. It was with this phrase echoing in his chest that he got into the car the next morning, driving along streets he knew by heart, but which now seemed to have new contours. When he arrived, Laura was already waiting for him at the gate. He was different, not in appearance, but in posture. I didn't wear makeup. He wore simple clothes. It seemed small compared to the house that was once the scene of promises. He entered, and they didn't exchange words for the first few minutes. They sat on opposite sides of the table in the room. And there, with her hands folded, she began to speak. Laura didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't beg. She said that there were not enough excuses for what she did, but that she needed to explain not to be absolved, but to understand herself. She spoke about the emptiness she felt even though she was loved, about the fear of settling, about the hunger for validation that she didn't even know she had. She told how, little by little, she lost herself in versions of herself that she invented to please others, until she no longer knew who she was. He said he used Daniel as a mirror of what he wanted to be, but that he never managed to live up to it. That his betrayal wasn't just physical, it was existential. And that, perhaps, was worse than the act itself. Daniel listened without interrupting, his gaze fixed, his fingers drumming lightly on the wood. When she finished, she didn't say she understood. I didn't say I forgave her. He just said that now he could clearly see the size of the gap between the love he offered and the love she needed. And that perhaps loving her so much was a mistake, not for her, but for himself. He got up, walked to the door, but before leaving, he looked at her for the last time and said, "I have wished you well for so many years. Today, I just want you to finally want this for yourself." And he left, without looking back. As he got into the car, he took a deep breath. I didn't feel relief, but something deeper, liberation. The certainty that he had done everything he could. That there was nothing left to say. When he returned home, Clara was waiting for him on the porch with 2 cups of tea. He sat next to her, and there was no need to explain anything. She took his hand and squeezed tightly. And in that touch, there was the silent promise that the new beginning could finally begin. But even so, something still hung in the air. One last echo. One last move. Something that had not yet been fully revealed. Because even stories that already seemed closed can hide a last gesture, a last choice, a last impact. And what would come later would change everything once again. The day after his last meeting with Laura, Daniel decided to leave the city for a few days. He wanted to breathe different air, hear other voices, walk down streets where no corner reminded him of frustrated promises or interrupted dialogues. He chose a small place in the countryside, a discreet inn near a waterfall that he had visited when he was still single. He didn't tell anyone, not even Clara, who noticed his absence from the short message he sent, "I need silence for a few days." "It's not distance, it's care." She responded with just one word, "Come back." And that was enough for him to continue in peace. The hours on the road were silent. He didn't turn on the radio, he didn't answer calls, he just drove with his eyes fixed on the asphalt line and the weight of everything he had experienced on his mind. It was no longer doubts that haunted him, but the echo of choices. He knew now that loving someone is no guarantee that they will be loved with the same purity. And that it's often not the other person's fault for not knowing how to reciprocate, but yours for not seeing that love also requires emotional reciprocity. At the inn, the days passed slowly. He woke up early, drank coffee alone, sat for long hours watching the water fall from the rocks and tried to get used to the idea of a weightless new beginning. On one of these mornings, sitting on a wooden bench covered in dew, he saw an older couple walking hand in hand along the trail. There was no rush in their steps, nor tension in their gazes. They walked like someone who had already wasted too much time fighting against the inevitable and now chose only peace. Daniel couldn't help but think, would he one day be able to look at someone with that same simplicity, without carrying with him the trauma of having already been torn apart inside? Love, I thought, should be more about daily choice than about the past we carry. And maybe he was still learning that. One cloudy afternoon, he decided to write. Not letters. Not memories. But loose thoughts. You wrote about forgiveness that needs no return. About pains that do not go away, but become part of the contour of who we are. About silence as a form of healing. And about self-love, which sometimes only blooms after someone uproots its wrong roots. He ended the text with a sentence that sounded like a farewell to what it was: I no longer need life to give me back what I lost. I just ask that it teaches me to take better care of what I still have. Upon rereading it, he felt like he could finally go back. Meanwhile, Clara continued her routine, but with a restless heart. She trusted Daniel, but his silence was too vast. Not because of the lack of messages, but because of the lack of signs. She knew it wasn't abandonment, but rather a process that she couldn't force. And it was at this time that she also dove into reflection. She began to wonder if she was ready to love someone who was still rebuilding his own foundations. Her life had also been marked by disappointments, and so she had learned not to create unrealistic expectations. But Daniel was different. There was a depth to him that required more than presence. It required surrender. And she knew that when he returned, she would need to be whole to receive him. Or else, know when to let him go. When Daniel finally returned, the city seemed smaller, as if the days away had broadened his gaze. He passed the street of his old house without looking, parked in front of the new apartment and took a deep breath before going up. He found Clara sitting at the table, reading. She didn't smile right away. He just watched him for a few seconds. He walked to her slowly and said, "I came back lighter." Clara closed the book, looked him in the eye and replied, "Then I hope there's room for what we can still build." The two hugged without haste. It wasn't a soap opera reunion. It was a real encounter. And in that embrace, Daniel understood that there was a possible future, but that it needed to be built carefully, without rushing, and with all the cards on the table. In the following days, they decided to travel together. Not to forget, but to start. They went to a simple place, without luxury, without major attractions. They just wanted to share the time, the silences, the looks. And it was on this trip that Clara, for the first time, spoke about the pain she herself carried. He talked about an abusive relationship that lasted years, about the traumas, about the difficulty in trusting. Daniel listened to her carefully, held her hand the entire time, and when she finished, he said, "So there are two of us who have survived storms. Now we just need to learn to live without carrying our umbrellas every day." They both smiled. And at that moment, without needing to say it, they knew there was something genuine there. Not the intense passion at the beginning of a romance, but the solid construction of a love that understands the weight of the other's baggage. Laura, on the other hand, continued in a solitary process of reconstruction. He left the house where he lived, moved to a small rented apartment, and went back to school. She started attending emotional support groups, not to expose her story, but to understand herself. "I wanted to understand why he destroyed everything he built. He was no longer looking for a return. I didn't have any hopes for Daniel. But yes, I wanted to be someone who no longer carried the need for approval from others as fuel to live." Little by little, he began to regain his taste for writing, for art, for things that he had left aside years ago. And on one of those lonely nights, when reviewing old files on the computer, she found a folder with photos from the time when she and Daniel still believed in each other. He didn't have the courage to open it. But it didn't go off. He decided to leave it there, as a reminder that it is possible to be better than what he was before. It was at that moment that life prepared another of its subtle tests. A mutual friend of the two was organizing a charity exhibition. He invited them both, without knowing the complexity of what still existed there. Daniel received the invitation with hesitation. Clara encouraged him to go, saying that sometimes facing the past head-on is the only way to realize how much we have evolved. Laura, upon receiving the same invitation, thought about refusing. But something in her said that perhaps, looking into his eyes once again, in another time, in another version, could be the last missing piece to close the cycle. On the day of the event, the hall was full, but not noisy. There was an atmosphere of respect, of introspection. Daniel arrived with Clara, wearing a simple suit, but with the posture of someone who no longer needed to prove himself. Laura arrived later, alone, wearing a discreet dress and her hair tied up, conveying serenity. Their eyes met briefly. There was no immediate approach. Just the recognition of two people who were everything to each other, and now they were just closed chapters. During the exhibition, in a moment of pause near a wooden sculpture, Laura approached Clara. There was a natural nervousness, but she took a deep breath and said, "Thank you for taking care of him." Clara, firmly and tenderly, replied, "He's the one taking care of himself. I just walk alongside." Laura smiled with moist eyes, nodded, and walked away. Daniel watched from a distance, and felt something rare there, relief. For the first time, I saw Laura as someone who finally understood the damage she had caused, not with anger, but with awareness. And that was enough. Later that night, already at home, Daniel looked at Clara and said, "Do you know what the hardest part is? It wasn't being betrayed. It was realizing that I betrayed myself for a long time, ignoring how I felt." Clara replied with a deep look, "Maybe this is how we mature. When we finally stop betraying ourselves." They toasted with simple wine, sitting on the living room floor, surrounded by books and low lights. And there, in the midst of simplicity, what was between them grew silently. No promises, but with presence. And on the other side of the city, Laura was finishing reading a book that talked about self-love. He closed the last page, got up, opened the window of the small apartment and felt the wind touch his face. For the first time, I didn't feel pain when breathing. Maybe because, finally, he was learning to live without pretending. Maybe because she knew that, even though she no longer had Daniel's love, she could still love herself. And maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something real. Daniel woke up that morning to soft light filtering through the curtains and with a feeling he hadn't felt in a long time, completeness. It wasn't a sudden ecstasy, nor a noisy happiness. It was an internal silence that no longer hurt, an absence of anguish, a peace built brick by brick over time. He got up slowly, preparing coffee while Clara slept in the room. I observed the movements of the boiling water, the aroma of dust rising in the air, and I noticed how the details now had a different weight. I no longer needed to hold on to past memories to feel like I had experienced something intense. Now it was the present that filled him. He decided to open an old email that he had saved as a favorite, where he had left unsent messages, texts that he wrote to himself when he needed to express what he felt. He read one of them, written months before: "One day, perhaps I will understand that my greatest liberation was losing what I most wanted to preserve." And smiled. Because I understood. Not with resentment, but with maturity. He had given new meaning to the pain. He had transformed a betrayal into the foundation for his new version. The pain had been real, deep, devastating. But he survived it. And more than that, he built a new love without having to forget what he lived before. That same morning, Laura left the courtroom with her head held high. The defamation lawsuit he was facing had finally ended, with an agreement where he publicly acknowledged his actions and faced the financial consequences. He could have fought to deny it, to avoid exposure, but he chose not to run away anymore. He assumed every word, every wrong decision, every silence he preferred when he could have spoken the truth. She now walked with less weight, even though she was still judged in many places she went. He no longer sought to clean up his own image. I was looking for consistency with who I wanted to be from now on. He had met his mother again, with whom he hadn't spoken for years, and in that reunion, he heard something that tore him up inside: "You don't need to be perfect, my daughter. But you need to be true." And that was engraved in his soul. He changed neighborhoods, started giving private writing classes, frequented public libraries and wrote fictitious letters to strangers that he left hidden in books. A small gesture, but it made her feel like she could still touch someone, even without being seen. Loneliness still hurt on cold days, but now she knew how to welcome herself. He learned to listen to himself, to comfort himself. And most importantly, he learned to look in the mirror without needing to justify himself. Clara, in turn, had left aside the armor she had been carrying since her previous divorce. Next to Daniel, he rediscovered lightness. But not a shallow lightness, of someone who pretends that life is easy. A mature lightness, of someone who has fallen and gotten up, of someone who recognizes in small things a grandeur that previously went unnoticed. He opened a small art gallery, something he always dreamed of, but never had the courage to do. Daniel supported her from the beginning, but not as a savior, as a partner. And she loved him for it. Not by completing it, but by adding to it without trying to erase what came before. They learned together to respect silences, pasts, limits. And in that relationship, they found a kind of happiness that doesn't require eternal promises, just the honesty of being there for as long as it lasts. One night, months after their last contact, Laura ran into Daniel by chance in a bookstore. He was leafing through an architecture book and she, distracted, was looking for some novel. Their eyes met. There was no discomfort, no exaggerated surprise. Just a brief, restrained but sincere smile. Daniel approached and asked how she was. She replied that she was fine, really. And it was. He commented on Clara's gallery, on her plans for a trip to the south. Laura spoke about the Letters Project, about a literary exhibition that she would participate in as a speaker. The conversation lasted just a few minutes, but it was enough to close any point that was still in doubt. As they said goodbye, she said, "Thank you for being my mirror, even when I didn't like what I saw." And he replied, "And thank you for showing me that sometimes you have to break down to rebuild yourself right." Everyone went their own way. There was no more pain there. Just respect. A chapter closed with dignity. In the car on the way home, Daniel reflected on how life was capable of surprising us when we stopped resisting the flow. For a long time, he believed that Laura would be his final destination. Afterwards, he thought he would never be able to love someone again without fear. But now, I understood that true love is not about forgetting what was, but about using what was as a basis for not repeating the same patterns. When he arrived, Clara was waiting for him with a glass of wine and a draft of a new project in hand. He sat next to her, listened to her ideas carefully, and, in the end, said, "Let's go together." Not as a promise, but as a renewed choice. That night, lying next to each other, Daniel realized that love didn't need to be dramatic to be intense. That love, when mature, is made of conscious pauses, of shared silences, of looks that say more than speeches. And that there, beside her, he had found what he thought didn't exist for so long, peace with meaning. Laura, at that same time, wrote a letter to herself. Not to blame, not to justify, but to recognize what was and what has become. She wrote about the days she felt lost, the times she wanted to disappear, and the exact moment she chose to live. He ended the letter with a sentence that he might never have had the courage to say out loud, "Today, I forgive myself." He folded the sheet, put it in a shoe box where there were already other letters, and looked out the window. The street lights seemed softer, as if they were lighting a new path. Hers. For the first time, she felt she could walk without running, without hiding, without lying. It was just her. And now, enough was enough. If you made it this far, tell us what you thought of this story. We want to know your honest opinion. Would you have forgiven? Do you think Laura deserved another chance? And Daniel, did you do the right thing by moving forward? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next stories. Here, we will always bring narratives that provoke, move, and make you think. And remember, this channel does not support any type of betrayal. All stories are fictional, created to show how costly wrong decisions can be. The message we leave is clear: cheating is not worth it. Until the next story.